what led you to say that there's a plan to depopulate the world?
It started with this sculpture which actually exists in America, which is glorifying the fact that there is a quite clear intention to reduce the population by over 90%. That's where it began. So the thing is, it's not a matter of debate. This sculpture exists, and it states very clearly on the sculpture that is the intention of the New World Order. So this is completely beyond argument or opinion. It's there. You can look at the photographs, you can go and see it for yourself. So that, I think, is significant. That there definitely is a movement designed to reduce the population.
Okay.
And this links back to all sorts of subjects. One of the ways that you can look at this, which goes back a very long time, is the idea that human beings were created as a slave race.
Yeah.
This is where it links in, that we were actually providing food for other beings, for other levels of existence, and the primary substance which we give is fear. So it's rather like if you've got a colony of bees, and the bees are all, worker bees are collecting the pollen, and the pollen is being used to provide nutrition for the little worker grubs that turn into worker bees. So you can see how that works, and you've got the royal jelly for the queens. In this situation, the food which we are providing is fear thoughts constantly. And
so does that not, I mean, we obviously we discussed that in the last podcast, and we discussed the fear thoughts, is if that is the agenda of having humans to produce fear and fear energy, is it not the more of us, the more fear, the better?
Exactly. This is something that is very confusing, and I don't understand how these two things link together. I guess one of the jobs that we're doing is we're looking at and we're examining particular puzzle pieces of this jigsaw and trying to see how they relate to each other. So I agree with you, this is the one I don't personally understand, except that if you did have a ruling elite and you have an awareness that the world is being damaged through pollution and toxicity from all the various chemicals which are produced through industrialization, a very simple solution to that problem, rather than to actually control the pollution at its source, would be to control the population. If you didn't have such a big population, then you wouldn't have to have any concerns. And this links into fundamentalist religions, and particularly fundamentalist Christianity in the heartlands of America, where they're saying it's okay, you don't have to be concerned about you don't have to be concerned about the pollution of the planet or the damage that's being created, because there's a bigger agenda. If the bigger agenda is to reduce the population, then that's automatically taking care of this issue about damage to the planet.
But you're a Christian, so don't worry, because you'll be saved.
Exactly. You are the right colour, and you're living in the right part of the right country in the right time frame, so you get the golden ticket, and all the rest of them doesn't matter.
So, I mean, that makes sense what you said, and that's potentially how it does fit the agenda. It's gotten to a point now where there's too many of us, it's no longer sustainable, so there has to be a cull and start again. And I suppose it's a farming method, isn't it?
It's a farming method, and the funny thing is this is done in the present day with deer and with badgers. Human beings suddenly decide that the reason why tuberculosis in cattle is a problem is because badgers exist, so let's just kill as many badgers as we can. I love the logic behind that, and then that will mean we won't have such a problem with the TB in the cattle. Or you have a situation where the trees are being nibbled to such an extent they're starting to suffer, so what you do is you kill the animals which eat the bark of the tree. It is a similar principle in operation.
Yeah. And even as a simple farming process, there comes a point when you have got to cut all your wheat out of the wheat field and start again, because it's grown to such an extent there's no room left anymore.
And I love the fact that you say that, because you remind me of the fact that there's something we brought up earlier. It seems that those who have not necessarily our best interests at heart are working from an entirely different timescale than from what you and I might think of in our daily lives. So I'll give you an example. Codex Alimentarius, which has been created, and you can see loads of stuff on the internet, was all to do with the idea of restricting the availability to people of different useful medicinal herbs and plants, and to encourage genetically modified crops and to patent crops, all the things done to reduce our choice. And what got me about this is that this has been introduced, or is being introduced, over the last few years. They came up with this one and they rubber stamped it and agreed with it back in the 1960s. They're prepared to have a 50-year timescale to bring that from theory into operation. And that really starts to clarify the timescales in which these people are operating. It's not like what we're used to.
Because they understand humans more than we understand ourselves, perhaps. They understand humans are very resistant to change, but when you engender it slowly and a little bit at a time, push a little bit more now and a little bit more now, there is pretty much nothing you can't get away with a human.
That's right. And the wonderful thing about Hitler and Nazism is he said that you can hide things in plain sight, and if you tell a lie often enough and for long enough, it becomes people's truth. And thus the pharmaceutical products, which brings us back to this rather strange plant. So there's a green plant and it can grow anywhere in the world. From the harshest countries such as like Siberia, it grows perfectly happily. It's got the name Cannabis ruderalis. And it can go from those extremes all the way down to semi-desert and maybe even desert conditions where it's known as Cannabis sativa and Cannabis indica. And there's this one plant which has extraordinary healing properties. Well, bearing in mind what we've been talking about, and bearing in mind the shamanic axiom, nothing is as it seems, nothing is as it appears to be, well, if I was in the business of wanting to promote as many heavily commercial products as possible to maintain people in a state of sickness, I would not want this plant to be in existence. So what happened, a man called Harry J. Anslinger, a long time ago, back in the 1930s I believe it is, changed the world. So here's the thing, if you say one man can change the world, question mark, true or false, answer true, because one man changed the world. He got a bee in his bonnet about this plant, he got certain very strong opinions about it, very negative, and he managed to persuade the citizens of New York, through the legislature, through the government, to make that plant illegal. In due course, the Marijuana Tax Stamp Act was created. I should make a little segue into this because a new word was created deliberately, the word marijuana. Marijuana was a newly created word, and it was done deliberately to confuse and to obfuscate. The word cannabis and the word hemp, these were well known of. The word marijuana was only used within the context of Mexican use of this particular plant. So when all the laws were produced and it was called marijuana, the people growing the hemp thought that doesn't matter, doesn't bother us, we're not growing marijuana, we're growing hemp. The people concerned with the cannabis weren't bothered, it's not marijuana, it's cannabis. So they managed to sneak it in the back door by calling it marijuana. So the Marijuana Tax Stamp Act in the 1930s was one of the fundamental legislative principles which was used to make it illegal. They became so successful, Anslinger and the people he attracted to him, and they made use of all the media in the time. They made films like Reefer Madness, which came out in the 1940s and 50s, to explain to the population at large how terribly dangerous this particular plant was. And gradually over time, the whole of the United States of America was a no-go area for this plant, and this plant had a price on its head and it was destined to be destroyed. And then even more amazingly, because of course the American government has huge sway with the United Nations, through the auspices of the United Nations they managed to make this plant illegal in literally every country in the world until a few years ago, and now things are starting to change. It's not the same anywhere in Portugal or Spain or Switzerland or Holland or about 6 states of America, which includes definitely Colorado, Arizona, Washington State, Oregon, parts of California. Things are starting to change, but for decades, for many decades, this plant has been so severely demonized. And there are places, particularly in Southeast Asia, where the death penalty is invoked to this day. Fascinating. So how this plant has had such a reputation. Well, of course, if the plant has got any really useful medicinal properties, you can see why you'd want to do that, because who's going to make a large amount of money about a plant that, if it's useful for people and actually cures them many of the diseases, well, you've lost your income stream straight away. That's no good at all.
Yeah, I mean the obviously the most potent and healing form of the plant is the oil. Would I be right in saying that? It's the THC oil.
This is interesting you should bring this up, because I don't know how long this has been around, but I understand it's a relatively recent preparation. Although I am aware of cannabis oils being available all the way back in the 1970s. At that point, I never heard of anyone talking about making use of this for any medicinal purposes.
I've heard that it was used anciently in ancient times as an oil.
As an oil?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I think even it was maybe the Egyptians or there was a particular civilization that really revered it, and it was given a name like like nectar of the gods or something like that.
Okay.
But yeah, and it was always eaten throughout history. It was only in recent times it started to become smoked.
Okay.
And it was when it started to become imported into the British and the European worlds, and then later the US, that because the smoking of opium was popular, obviously then it started to combust cannabis and use cannabis to smoke. And you know, I'm trying to remember what I read in Terence McKenna's book on the subject.
Okay.
But yeah, and yeah, what you said about it being made illegal and the reasons why it was made illegal, etc. But I think it was when people started to smoke it as well. It was almost lumped in the same bracket as opium, and smoking opium and the potential for it to cause harm.
That's very interesting. Let's just explain what this oil is that people are speaking about. So the technical term it's used is RSO oil. RSO oil is so simple to prepare. As soon as it was possible to allow a plant like grapes or barley to ferment and produce an alcoholic liquor, once a society was able to take that liquor and distill it down to produce a spirit, like whiskey, vodka or whatever, as soon as they had that technology, it was then theoretically possible to create this RSO oil. And as Neil is explaining, which I didn't realise, it's been around a lot longer than I thought. So ever since the days of distillation it's been possible, because what you need to do is you get the plant material, and you can use it fresh, you can use it dried, it doesn't matter at all, but you add a load of distilled alcohol to it, you give it a good agitation over an exactly specific period of time. What then happens is the active ingredients fall off the plant into the liquid. You do a simple filtration process through a sieve, and you've then got the liquid containing the active medicinal ingredient. All you need to do if you're living in a hot country is to put this into a large pan and let the sun evaporate it off. When the alcohol residues have evaporated, you can end up with this thick sticky oil substance at the bottom of the pan. Scrape it off with a knife, bingo. We're talking about a very simple process which could have been done anywhere in the world, but particularly easily in a hot country once you'd created the ability to distill alcohol. So that's all it takes to be able to do this. It's not soluble in water, so you would not get any result from doing this with water. It had to be alcohol.
Okay, so what then were the uses for this oil once you have it?
Right, the uses for the oil. This is what I find very interesting, because there are many different systems of medicine. So this really falls in the purview of herbal medicine, and there's a completely different approach, which is homeopathic medicine. With homeopathic medicine, you are getting a very precise remedy, and you are attempting to tailor it to the exact constitutional and conditional needs of your client. And when you get a perfect match, you get a result. Herbal medicine is not like that. It's much more of a gradual process. So the person takes this oil, which is a herbal preparation, the active ingredients of the whole plant, and by consuming this oil, various healings can take place. So what it's been known for, it's been known to heal cancers, heart disease, skin conditions, and a whole variety of other illnesses. But you've only got to say cancer and heart disease, and you've already covered two of the biggest killers in the Western world. So that causes anyone to set up and take notice, because these are illnesses for which the orthodox medical establishment doesn't have any really good answers for. So what a dangerous medicine this is if it can cure illnesses as severe and as serious as this. So I guess this then leads to the question of how. This is something that's been exercising my interest, particularly last year.
Yeah, because I mean, there's a lot of people who would say there's a lot of claims at the moment about plants such as cannabis oil, such as ayahuasca, such as various other plants, iboga, whatever they might be, and their abilities to heal and put an end to diseases such as cancer, etc. And what a lot of people are saying, well, there's actually no scientific evidence, there's only anecdotal evidence of people who have said, but you know.
Now that's a good point. Let me take you up on that, because what you're saying is there's increasing anecdotal evidence and a lack of scientific evidence. Now if you keep that plant illegal, therefore if anyone does any research on it, they're liable to be imprisoned, possibly for a long period of time. That's a really clever and sophisticated way to make sure there isn't any scientific evidence, because you can't gather it if you're not free to do so. So that's one point. However, I want to go into the how in a bit more detail. I was married to a woman and she had cancer for 25 years, and after 23 years she got a terminal diagnosis and she died. And therefore this is a subject which is close to my heart. And this is what I found out. When you look at serious illnesses like cancer and heart disease, there is a condition in the person which is going to make that illness worse and is going to make the person have a greater illness, and that is stress. Now, I must be really clear about this. Some stress is actually very good for a human being. People need a certain amount of stress because it's a stress that can cause a person to change their circumstances, to improve their lot, to maybe go and get a qualification, to train, to become more successful in life, earn more money, create better circumstances. I can see stress has a certain part to play in life which is useful. I'm talking about excessive stress. When the stress of a person's life becomes excessive, what happens is the whole of the human body, all the cells of the body, is in a state which is antithetical to life. In other words, toxins are produced as a result of these stresses. The person is so stressed they can't get rid of the toxins enough. They're living in an environment which is toxic, from pollution of the air, pollution of the water, chemicals are taken into their body, and toxins in the food. So their body's filling up with toxins faster than they can release them. If you are very stressed, it's more difficult to release toxins. So I'm coming to the how. The how, the reason why this medicine cures, is because it causes a person to relax. I'll be even more firm, it forces the person to relax. When the person consumes the RSO oil, what happens to them is that their state of consciousness changes, and the stress head part of that person literally relaxes, and the person becomes very chilled out, and they quite often feel like they don't really want to do anything very much. They may become quite giggly and find everything very amusing, and what is very likely to happen to the person if they're very stressed is they'll fall asleep. So a classic case of someone who's got they've either got a severe illness or they're living a lifestyle which is creating an illness which will one day become severe. They're very stressed. You give them the RSO oil, they'll get relaxed, they'll get giggly, and they'll fall asleep. And that actually is a real healing, because when the person is in that sleep-like state, that state of deep relaxation, there's no stress. A lot of people living the frenetic lifestyles today, when they're actually asleep, they're still stressed, but when you're having the RSO oil and you fall asleep, you are relaxed to a deep level of relaxation which enables the body to heal itself. And here's the key. Most people think that the person becomes ill and then they need help to heal. They need to have something they take from outside and it's going to heal them. That's not how it works. What the medicine does, and this is what the green medicine does particularly, is it allows the person to become so relaxed that the body is able to heal itself. I've been looking for a long time in the orthodox medical establishment to think of a parable or an example to explain how this works, and I came up with it last year. This is it. If a person is suffering from really severe trauma, life-threatening, sometimes what they do when they take the person into hospital, they're in intensive care, the medical establishment will deliberately and artificially induce a coma, and they'll use drugs to do this. So the person is now in a synthetic coma. Because they're in a coma, their rational mind is incapable of any thoughts, they're knocked out, they're in a coma. And because they're in a coma, the body is then able to heal itself. So we actually use this already in orthodox medicine, so there's a direct parallel between orthodox use and this alternative practice with the green medicine. So you take the green medicine, the body becomes so relaxed, the body then starts to heal itself. And this is how it works, is it reduces the stress levels to the point that the body is able to heal itself. And how does it do that? Well, the toxins which have built up to possibly alarming levels start to be released. And as soon as sufficient toxins are released, then the body can really go into more of a deep healing process, and the cancerous growth or whatever it is that's a problem, it's wonderful, the body. What the body does when it's in healing mode, the cancerous growth is simply reabsorbed by the body. So the body literally undoes the cancer and the person reverts to a normal healthy state.
Wow.
It's as simple as that. Chilling out, relaxing. And anyone who's ever known someone who likes cannabis as a habit, they tend to be people that like to chill out a lot.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, so the cure for cancer is relaxing.
Ultimately it's relaxing. Now I've got some very personal anecdotal evidence about my wife, because what I noticed, especially in the later years of my wife's life, is that what she would do every day, she would wake up and she would be frantically determined to book more appointments, to have more therapies and more healings and more treatments, because she was terribly, terribly frightened she was going to die.
Which is more stress.
Which is more stress. In fact, the biggest stress my wife had is the fact that she knew she had 2 children, one of whom had not reached the age of majority, and she'd made the promise, which is, I do not want to die until you are an adult. So she had this terrible stress of wanting to be alive for her children more than herself. That's an interesting little sidebar. And having this great need to find the things that worked and to chase appointments and chase treatments. So she spent her life literally chasing treatment after treatment after treatment, putting herself into more and more and more stress. And a lot of these treatments cost considerable amounts of money, so having to find the money to fund the treatments and all the rest of it. So her life was a constant state of stress to try to find something that would actually enable her to be healed. And there's another interesting sidebar. She had some very strongly negative judgments against this plant. And although me and her, we knew nothing about this, or at this particular point we had no idea it was a healing opportunity or option, but she had a very strongly negative view about that particular thing anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I've only ever experienced the oil once myself, and I think I went into it with some negative preconceptions about the plant.
Okay.
You know, I'd often seen, you know, and not being a cannabis user myself, I'd often seen sometimes that I felt it created an inertia in people. It meant that they didn't do things. It made them lazy. It made them incapable of getting things done, etc., etc. And which I think it does do if it's abused. You know, people can abuse it to the point where they don't, you know, they kind of lose themselves in it, and they ignore the world, if you like. But I also found that when I had it, it really opened up things in me that I didn't like about myself, that I didn't even know I didn't like about myself.
Yes.
So I thought the plant was controlling, but really what it was showing me was that you're controlling. You're always trying to control your situation, you're controlling other people, whatever it is, you're always trying to control. And it was only actually through talking to yourself that it slowly helped me to realise that. But one thing that it absolutely did, after the initial fight that I had with it that night that I took it, the next day I was in such a state of deep relaxation, and I could feel the healing work starting and the healing process in the body, and then through the next week, you know, it was as if my mind had been slowed down to a point where I could start to recognise things within myself, because it wasn't going so fast. I was taking time to stop and analyse the things I was saying, the things I was doing, and I was like, oh, you do that, you say that, you act like that, and it was like it was showing me a lot more about myself over the subsequent days, and it's something that I definitely need to go back to as well. But yeah, a lot of what you said there did resonate with me in terms of how the healing process works. I remember feeling that, and almost as well, like it brought up another thought for me. I remember reading a book, Life of Pi, where it's about a young boy, he gets stranded at sea. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I do,
yeah.
Yes.
And he's got a tiger on the boat with him, but he looks at the manual and in the medical box, and it's written, and it's a really old manual, and the advice in the manual is, if somebody on your boat gets sick, don't start messing around with them, because the body is the greatest doctor you have on that boat. The body will do the healing. The more you start messing around with that person, the more likely you are just to inflame the situation and cause more problems. The body does the work,
and interesting enough, that's the central axiom of the medical profession: first, do no harm.
Right. Okay.
And actually, so much harm is currently done because of failing to take into account what you just said. I want to bring you up on the abuse, because I think that's a very good one, and I want to give the example of this. Water abuse is possible. Although the vast majority of people are chronically dehydrated, it is possible to drink too much water. I actually do know someone who did this and made herself ill, and she was drinking like 5 litres a day, so no wonder 2 to 3 is the general recommendation. So what I'm saying here is you can take something as life-giving and as essential to the human body as water, and you can even abuse that. So when it comes to a plant, that's also definitely a possibility. So a person can abuse a plant. And I have listened to a lot of people who've said what you said, that, oh, these people that smoke this particular plant, they tend to be very lazy. I've heard that comment said. And I've met people who do very definitely conform to that stereotype. And then on the other hand, I've also met other people who clearly do not conform to the stereotype, and I think you've hit the nail on the head with the thing to do with the abuse. So I want to take that into the word respect, because this is what I find to be such an important thing. Now, there's a book which is called The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. The Sacred Mushroom on the Cross. Well, now Google that, we show you the image of that on the screen, because The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, written by the author you can see there, he refers to the work done by a guy called Gordon Wasson. And Wasson did a lot of work to do with mushrooms, consumption of mushrooms in traditional indigenous societies and indigenous tribal societies where people consumed other plants. And what he noticed was as follows: if the group that are making use of the plant or the fungus incorporate a lot of ceremony and ritual around its use, then this plant is thereby respected and there's no problem. So the example I love to give is tobacco. Tobacco in the North American, Native American tradition was highly respected, consumed in a pipe called the peace pipe that was passed around in ceremony in circles. You can see all the ceremony attached there. If you go to Central and South America, where the shamanic tradition is to smoke what we would consider to be gargantuan quantities of Amazonian tobacco, which is 18 times stronger than the strongest European tobaccos, there's something we start to notice. These people are not all dying of lung cancer. In fact, they don't seem to be dying of any illnesses connected with tobacco at all. This is another example how the shamanic model says things are not as they appear to be. So what appears to be is that tobacco is terribly damaging and harmful for the health. That's what it appears to be. and that comes from a society where there's been a lot of disrespect of the plant. A good way to disrespect the tobacco plant is to put it in the cigarette packets, and then you can take the cigarette out of the packet, light it and smoke it without even being aware of what you're doing. Contrast with the Native Americans. They're in a circle, they've got the tobacco in the circle, they're blessing it, they're taking it out, putting it in the pipe, they're blessing it again, they're lighting it, passing from person to person. Wasson had this theory, which is that adding ceremony to the working with the plant made it safe, and stripping the ceremony away made it problematical. So this has been very helpful to me in understanding how these plants work. So I find that the people that suffer from what I would call the negative aspects of cannabis use, such as being lazy and idle and can't be asked to get anything together, these are people that tend to disrespect the plant and have no conception of ceremony, whereas I find other people that seem to work very effectively in their daily lives with this plant, they seem to have automatically incorporated ceremony into their life. And I can think of one particular friend who actually says a prayer every time he lights up his smoke, and that's his way of connecting to the divinity in the plant and the divinity in himself, thereby protecting himself. So it's all fascinating. Thank you.
Nice. Yeah, it's. I completely agree with what you're saying. Like just because everything has the ability to be abused, doesn't it? People abuse food.
If you can abuse water, you can abuse anything.
Exactly. So, it just kind of it was to help explain the if I can say the reasons why I had some maybe preconceived ideas, which were my fault really.
Well, let's be fair to you. You had some opinions and you had some judgments about this plant, and you come from a society which is full of opinions and judgments about a plant. So I would say it's not your fault. I would say you were simply receiving the messages your society was giving you.
Yeah. And the interesting thing as well, like you talked about indigenous cultures not abusing the plants and respecting them, there being a different scenario of use. You know, they did the tests on rats about drug abuse, where they put the cocaine and the heroin in the rat feeders, and they kept going back.
Yeah.
And there was a guy I was listening to it, and he looked at that and he said, well, of course the rats are miserable in those cages. Of course they're going to become heroin and crack addicts. And he created a rat utopia and put the crack and heroin there, and they didn't touch it.
Ah, fantastic!
They didn't touch it.
That's beautiful. That really illustrates the point. And let's just link into Peter Snow, because only 2 days ago or yesterday Peter Snow was on YouTube and Russell Brand was quoting it and showing images of Peter Snow. So he's an ancient, very well established BBC or ITV newsreader, never taken this particular plant in his life. He takes this plant, and guess what he does? The very first thing he does when he's taken this plant, he allows himself to be put into an MRI scanner. And surprise, surprise, when he's entombed in this machine full of magnets and God knows what else, he doesn't like being in there and he wants to get out. So guess what he does? He blames the plant. No mention that the MRI scanner might be the cause of him not being very comfortable, but that's priceless. I want to thank you, Neil, because we've brought up a lot of interesting subjects this afternoon, and I find whenever I get into a conversation with you about any subject whatsoever, there's ideas which I can present, and then there's information which you give, and quite often it's something that I've never seen before, never looked at before. It's very helpful.
No, definitely, and I've got quite a curious mind, so it's really good to get such knowledge, really, and be able to ask the questions and find the information. I think it's helpful for both of us, really.
Absolutely helpful for both of us, and if it's of any use to you, then you're most welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.